Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. The Library, a Magic Castle. Come to the Magic Castle when you are growing tall. Rows upon rows of word windows line every single wall. They reach up high as the sky, and you want to open them all. For every time you open one, a new adventure has begun. The Library, a Magic Castle. And now, boys and girls, our very first story is one of my very favorites. And it is entitled The Story of the First Christmas Tree. The story of the first Christmas tree was told to me by the Fairy Queen herself, so you may be quite sure it is a true one. And here it is. Once upon a time, there lived in the middle of a forest a poor woodcutter. He had one little daughter called Annis, whom he loved dearly. Annis was a dear little girl, kind and gentle. She was very fond of all the woodland creatures, and they in turn knew and loved her well. The fairies loved her also. They used to dance on top of the low stone wall that went around the little garden in front of the cottage. Annis, Annis, they would call to her while she was busy helping her mother in the kitchen. But she would shake her head. "Oh, I can't come. I'm busy," she would answer. But at night time, when she was fast asleep under her red quilt, they would come tapping at the little window. "Annis, Annis." Then she would slip out of bed and run quickly downstairs, and off she went with the fairies into the moon-shining woods. But the next day she was never sure whether it had been a dream or reality. Now, that was in the summer. Oh, it was winter now, and very cold. The sky was dark and heavy with coming snow. Every evening all through the winter, Annis would hang a little lantern with a candle in it on the small fir tree that grew just inside the garden gate. Her father could see it as he came home through the trees. It was a little bright welcome for him even before he reached home. On Christmas Eve, he went to work as usual. He came home for his dinner at midday and started back early. He was at work quite a long way off. "Now I shall finish there today," he said to his wife as he left the house. "Then I shall come nearer home. If the snow comes, it will be difficult to find the way in the dark evenings." And that very day the snow began. All the afternoon it fell in great soft flakes. Down, down, down. Oh, it seemed as if the whole sky were falling in little bits. The woodcutter worked hard in the fading light. It was quite dark by the time he had finished, and he had to keep shaking the snow from his shoulders and from his old hat. The wood was all neatly stacked in the little shed which he had built to house it. He started home with a sigh of relief, smiling to himself as he thought of his warm hearth and the bowl of hot porridge waiting for him, and of little Annis knitting in the chimney corner. But presently, how it happened I know not, for he knew the forest well, and the snow had almost stopped falling, and the moon was shining. He found that he had lost his way. But presently, he was quite cheerful at first. "In a minute I shall find the path again," he said. But minutes passed, and he did not find it. A cloud came over the moon. The snow began to fall again more thickly. It was like a moving, whirling mist where the trees stood less close together. The woodcutter began to lose heart. Then suddenly he saw a light ahead of him on one of the fir trees. "Can I be so near home?" he said to himself, half bewildered. But when he came near, he found that it was not a fir tree in his own garden that was lit up, but an ordinary forest tree. The little lights twinkled and glittered on its branches, burning brightly and steadily in spite of the falling snow. The woodcutter said, "If this be wicked magic, it will now disappear." But the lights burned more brightly than ever, and as he looked about, he saw in the distance another tree lit up in the same way. Then he understood. "It is the good fairies helping me," he said, and he trudged off cheerily in the direction of the second tree. And when he looked back, the first one had already grown dark again. But when he reached the second tree, another was shining ahead of him to show the way. And so he went from lighted tree to lighted tree until at last he was guided safely home to Annis's little lantern in his own garden. And always after that, he used to put lights on a little fir tree on Christmas Eve, in memory of the time when the fairies saved him from being lost in the forest. And so the custom began, and because it was such a pretty one, and because the fairies so willed it, it spread, and today the fairy Christmas tree is to be found all over the whole wide world, in houses where there are children and where fairies always come. And that is the story of the very first Christmas tree. And now, boys and girls, it's time for me to read our Do You Know book. And the one I've chosen to talk to you about today is, do you know all about the custom of sending Christmas cards? Do you know in 1843, an Englishman named Henry Cole had no time to write letters to his friends at Christmas time. So he hired an artist, J.C. Horsley, to design a Christmas card for him, and he had many cards printed. Joseph Condell colored each card by hand. Now these were the very first Christmas cards many years ago. Do you know each year in Boston, Louis Prang, a master card maker, held contests for the best Christmas card design. He was one of the very first Americans to print Christmas cards back in the 1800s. Do you know these were postcards without envelopes? And boys and girls, those are our Do You Knows, but I want you to know that I've been collecting those early postcards of the 1800s and the early 1900s, and I have a big album of them. And I want to show you some of my collection right now. This one says, December the 25th, a Merry Christmas. And you see there's a book behind it. And boys and girls, the very first Christmas cards were really not with Santa Claus, but they were all with flowers and birds. This says, very happy and may it be a joyous Christmas. And here, as you will see, I have to look in my little box. We had birds on some of our Christmas tree. And here it says, a blight Christmas. A beautiful bird, isn't it? And then, now remember, these are back in the 1800s. And this one is with Santa Claus. May Santa Claus, that nice old chap whom we so often read of, on Christmas bring you everything that you are now in need of. And here we have Santa Claus and his bag of toys. And here, boys and girls, we have one of my favorite Christmas cards, a Merry Christmas. And you know what that is? That is a plum pudding that my mother always made every Christmas, which is an English and Irish custom. And boys and girls, here we have two little girls visiting Santa Claus. And all it says here in the holly, Christmas greetings. And this is another favorite of mine because we have a beautiful book, and on the front is a church. And down at the bottom, it says, a Merry Christmas. And this one is Santa Claus going down the chimney. A beautiful, beautiful card. And it says Christmas wishes. And here's another one, Santa Claus going down the chimney. And one of my most valuable ones is this one, because this is a World War I veteran, and he's wishing, Santa Claus is wishing him a Merry Christmas to greet you on Christmas Day. My father was in World War I, so this is an especially precious card for me. And last of all, I want to show you this one. My dear little friends, I hope you are a good, I have to get it closer because this is very little writing. My little friend, I hope you are a good child, for on Christmas I will call at the house of all good little girls and boys. Hang your stocking up by the fireplace, and I will fill them with candies, nuts, and toys. Your friend, Santa Claus. And that's all about Christmas, isn't it? Boys and girls, I've enjoyed sharing my Christmas cards with you this morning. And I want to remind you to visit your public library, any of the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System. And be sure to check out some very good Christmas books. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with some other Christmas stories just for you. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read the story, The Christmas Cake. Oh, it was a joyful day for the McMulligan children when Mrs. McMulligan made Christmas cake. There were raisins to seed and eggs to beat and pans to scrape. Every one of the children, from the oldest to the youngest, helped to stir the batter when the good things were mixed together. Oh, mix it and stir it and taste, for everything in it and nothing to waste. And everyone's helped, even baby, to make the nice brown sugary Christmas cake, said Mrs. Mulligan as she poured the batter into the cake pan. The baker who lived at the corner was to bake the Christmas cake, so Joseph, the oldest boy, made haste to carry it to him. All the other children followed him, and together they went, oh so carefully, out the front door, down the sidewalk, straight to the shop where the baker was waiting. Oh, the baker's face was so round and so jolly that the McMulligan children thought he must look just like Santa Claus. He could bake the whitest bread and the lightest cake, and as soon as the children spied him, they began to call, oh, the cake is all ready, 'tis here in the pan. Now bake it, good baker, as fast as you can. No, no, said the baker, 'twould be a mistake to hurry in baking the Christmas cake. I'll not bake it fast, and I'll not bake it slow. My little round clock on the wall there will show how long I must watch and how long I must bake the nice brown sugary Christmas cake. The little round clock hung on the wall above the oven. Its face was bright and its stick was merry, and it was busy night and day, telling the baker when to sleep and when to eat and when to do his baking. It was just now striking 10, and it seemed to the McMulligan children very plainly to say, 'tis just the right time for the baker to bake the nice brown sugary Christmas cake. The oven was ready, and the baker made haste to put the cake in. Ho, ho, he cried gaily, now isn't this fun? 'Tis 10 by the clock, and the baking's begun. The tickety-tickety, when it strikes 1, if nothing should hinder, the cake should be done. Then the McMulligan children ran home to tell their mother what he had said, and the baker went on with his work. Oh, it was the day before Christmas, and a great many people came to his shop to buy pies and cakes. But no matter how busy he was waiting on them, he never forgot the McMulligan's cake. And every time he looked at the clock, it reminded him to peep into the oven. So well did he watch it, and so carefully did he bake it, that the cake was done on the stroke of 1, just as he had promised. He had scarcely taken it out of the oven when the shop door flew open. In came the McMulligan children, every one of them saying, "The clock has struck 1, the clock has struck 1. We waited to hear it, and is the cake done?" Now when they saw it, they thought it was the nicest, brownest, spiciest cake that was ever baked in a baker's oven. The baker himself said it was a beautiful cake, and if you had been at the McMulligans on Christmas Day, I am sure you would have thought so too. Now Joseph carried it, walking very slowly and carefully, and all the other children followed him out of the baker's shop, down the sidewalk, straight home. There Mrs. McMulligan was waiting for them. She was smiling at them from the window, and when they spied her, they all began to call, "Hurrah for our mamma! She surely can bake the nicest and spiciest Christmas cake. Hurrah for the baker! Hurrah for the fun! Hurrah for our Christmas cake! Now it is done." And of course, that is the story of the Christmas cake. And now, boys and girls, stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you the story, Granny Glittens and Her Amazing Mittens, a story you will not believe. Once there was an old woman who made mittens from good wool yarn. She made fine warm mittens. Right into the mittens she could knit a picture of a boy on a sled, a girl on skates, 2 yellow ducks, or anything else you could name. All the mothers and fathers for miles around ordered mittens for their children from Granny Glittens. The needles would flash and knit yarn pictures on the mittens in the old lady's kitchen from morning till night. Granny Glittens made mittens because she liked to make mittens, and she made mittens to sell. Now those mittens paid for the coal to keep Granny's little house warm. They paid for the egg for Granny's breakfast. They paid for the milk for Granny's black cat. Now, of course, Granny Glittens was very busy just before Christmas. Every child wanted a new pair of Granny's mittens for Christmas. And then the needles flashed in the morning and in the evening and in the middle of the day. But just before Christmas, everything went wrong. Oh, Granny Glittens had orders and orders for mittens. She had so many orders that she kept saying to herself, "Perhaps I can buy a new stove for my kitchen." Yes, the orders came in. It was the yarn that was wrong. Granny Glittens had to send to the city for yarn. She ordered red yarn and brown yarn and green yarn and yellow yarn and black yarn. But the store sent white yarn, balls and balls of white yarn, nothing but white yarn. With the yarn came a letter, "Dear Granny Glittens, we do not have red yarn or brown yarn or green yarn or yellow yarn or black yarn. All we have is white yarn. We have asked the other stores. They do not have red yarn or brown yarn or green yarn or yellow yarn or black yarn. All they have is white yarn. So we are sending you white yarn. We are sorry. The store." "Oh, oh," cried Granny Glittens. "Nobody wants white mittens. What shall I do?" The black cat came into the kitchen. Granny said to him, "I must think. Oh, I must think." So she thought and she thought. Supper time came and Granny was still thinking. At last the black cat began to cry for milk. "Oh, you poor cat," she said. "It is dark. You are hungry, and so am I. I will think some more later." She poured some milk for the cat. Then she opened her cupboard to see what she could find for herself. Red peppermints, green wintergreen, brown chocolate, black licorice, and yellow lemon drops. They were the colors she needed for her mittens. "Now, do you think," she asked the cat, "well, the only way to find out is to find out." She got out her 5 pans from the cupboard and she put them all on the stove. Then she put the peppermints in one, the wintergreen in another, the chocolate in the third, the licorice in the next, and the lemon drops in the last. Granny Glittens stirred the 5 pans very carefully with 5 spoons. And then she put a ball of white yarn into the peppermints. The yarn turned a beautiful red. She put a ball of yarn in each pan and stirred more carefully than ever. When each ball was the right color, she took it out and put in another. Now it was late that night and everyone else had been sleeping for hours and hours before Granny Glittens had all the red and green and brown and yellow and black yarn she needed. "Oh my goodness," she said to the cat. "Oh, I'm so tired. I'm so hungry. I could eat this yarn. I forgot all about my supper." And just for fun and to show the cat how hungry she was, Granny Glittens bit off a small piece of red yarn. Oh, it tasted so good. Granny tasted the other colors too. Granny Glittens smiled and smiled. And the next morning the knitting needles flashed and turned. The new mittens were wonderful. Not only did they have pictures of yellow ducks and fir trees and dancing bears and snowmen with black hats, the children could eat the yellow ducks and the fir trees and the dancing bears and snowmen with black hats. Granny Glittens sold so many mittens that she bought a lovely, shiny new stove for her kitchen. And of course, she was knitting mittens all year round, because just as soon as ever a father or mother bought a child a pair of mittens, the child said they were the very best present he had ever had. And you know, then they ate the pictures that were on the mittens. Now, can you believe this story? Well, seriously, this is a story that we have to believe. And it is the story of Mrs. Glittens, Granny Glittens, and her mittens. And now I have time enough to remind you that when you're making your Christmas list out for Santa Claus, be sure and list a present, because you know you can choose the wonderful books that you've already heard of, and you can add them to your list, and you know you can read that book over and over again all through the year, so you get a present that lasts all year long. And so too, boys and girls, let me remind you to enjoy all of Christmas right now, the Christmas parades, the sending of Christmas cards, and always remember to go to your public library, because we have wonderful Christmas programs planned for you all this holiday. And boys and girls, I see it's time for me to close our book of stories for this morning, but we'll be back next Saturday morning. Until then, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory Time.